The sun had barely risen when Officer Barnes and his partner Officer Kelly began their morning patrol through the quiet neighborhood of Eastwood Hills. Their shift had just started, and they were already on edge from a dispatcher's warning about recent car break-ins in the area. As they cruised slowly past rows of modest homes, they spotted a tall black man in a gray hoodie walking briskly down the sidewalk, carrying a stainless steel travel mug. Kelly nudged Barnes and nodded toward the man, muttering, "Suspicious behavior." Barnes pulled the car over abruptly, the tires screeching a bit too loud for a peaceful morning. The man stopped and looked at them calmly, his brows raised slightly, but his body relaxed. "Good morning, officers," he greeted, not unkindly, but with measured politeness. "Where you headed this early?" Kelly asked, stepping out of the car with an authoritative strut. "Just going to work," the man replied, taking a careful sip of his coffee. "You live around here?" Barnes asked as he approached, hand hovering near his holster. "Yes, a few blocks down on Maple Street," the man answered plainly. "You got ID on you?" Kelly snapped. The man nodded and reached slowly into his coat, producing a leather wallet. He held it out, but Barnes snatched it from his hand without thanks. "What's your name?" Kelly barked. "David Hill," he answered, still calm but slightly wary now. Barnes looked at the ID, but frowned, flipping it over like it might be fake. "This says David Hill, Chief of Police," he said, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "That's correct," Hill said. Kelly laughed sharply, shaking his head. "Nice try. You really expect us to believe that?" Barnes added, stepping closer. "It's the truth." "I'm on my way to headquarters right now," Hill said, gesturing to his city-issued badge clipped inside his wallet. But Kelly waved a dismissive hand. "Fake badge, fake ID, probably stolen. Hands behind your back," Barnes ordered. "Officers, I think you're making a big mistake," Hill said. "You'll have a chance to explain that downtown," Kelly shot back. Barnes pulled out the cuffs and clicked them around Hill's wrists. "This is completely unnecessary," Hill murmured, not resisting. "If you're really the chief, I'm the mayor," Kelly said with a smirk. They led him to the patrol car and pushed him into the back seat. As they drove, Kelly joked, "Hope he enjoys a donut behind bars." Barnes chuckled, not realizing how wrong they were. "I can't wait to see his face when we run this ID," Kelly added. At the station, they marched Hill past several other officers. Some of them gave surprised glances but didn't interfere. "Put him in holding room, too," Barnes instructed. Hill sat down quietly in the chair, eyes steady and unafraid. Kelly left to run the ID, still laughing under his breath. Barnes stood outside the room, arms crossed, confident they'd caught someone shady. What happened next would flip everything upside down. Inside the operations room, Officer Kelly inserted David Hill's ID card into the system scanner, still snickering at what he believed was an obvious fake. The young desk clerk beside him leaned over to peek at the screen, but his smirk slowly faded as the identification results began to load. Within seconds, the screen flashed, "David N. Hill, Chief of Police, Eastwood Department. Active status, verified badge ID 0041. Kelly's smirk crumbled into a confused frown as he leaned in closer, blinking several times to make sure he was seeing it right. "Wait, what the? This has to be a glitch," Kelly muttered under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. The clerk gave him a wary look and slowly turned his eyes back to the display, confirming the match with the man's photo and personnel records. "This isn't a joke, Officer Kelly." "That's him. That's the chief," the clerk said, his voice barely above a whisper as the gravity of the mistake set in. Kelly's hand dropped from the desk as panic started rising from the pit of his stomach, his face turning pale with a cold sweat. Oh no, no," he whispered, suddenly aware that their morning had just turned into a career-threatening disaster. Meanwhile, Officer Barnes stood watch outside the holding room, arms crossed and bored, completely unaware of the tidal wave of realization heading his way. Kelly stumbled backward from the terminal and turned on his heel, rushing out of the room with urgency in every stride. His heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed to drown out the sound of the busy station around him as he sprinted down the hallway. As he burst into the hallway and saw Barnes by the door, he shouted, "It's him." "That's actually Chief Hill we've got in there." Barnes uncrossed his arms and straightened up, blinking in confusion, his face tightening as the words registered in his brain. "You're joking, right?" Barnes asked, a nervous chuckle escaping before he realized Kelly wasn't laughing. "No, I'm dead serious. We arrested the chief of police. Kelly replied, nearly breathless. "Oh my God," Barnes muttered, stepping back from the holding room door like it was about to explode. "We cuffed him," Kelly continued, panic overtaking his voice. "We shoved him in the car like a thug." "We're dead," Barnes whispered, reaching for the door handle with a shaking hand. Inside the holding room, Chief Hill sat upright in the metal chair, calm but alert, watching them through the glass as they opened the door. Kelly entered first, hat in hand, voice trembling as he said, "Chief Hill, sir, there's been an unbelievable error." Hill didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire between them. Barnes stepped forward, hands nervously clasped, and said, "We truly didn't recognize you, sir. We thought you were suspicious." "Because I was walking while black in a hoodie?" Hill asked, raising a single brow. "And no, sir, we had a report of break-ins and, we misjudged the situation," Barnes stammered. "You cuffed your superior officer without cause. You profile me based on skin color and clothing. Is that how we do things in Eastwood now?" "Absolutely not, sir," Kelly said quickly, standing at attention like a new recruit facing a drill sergeant. "It won't happen again," Barnes added, his voice tight with shame. Hill stood slowly, and the air in the room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. "You're right about one thing," Hill said. "This won't happen again, not under my watch." He stepped forward, staring both officers down as the power dynamic shifted sharply in the span of a heartbeat. "You will report to my office immediately after roll call. Do not speak to anyone on the way. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." They both replied in unison, their voices barely audible. "Dismissed," Hill said, and they left the room with their heads bowed and their confidence shattered. Word of the arrest spread through the precinct like wildfire, and whispers turned into stunned silence wherever Hill's name was mentioned. Several officers who had watched Hill being walked in began piecing together what had happened, eyes wide in disbelief. Sergeant Lopez stepped into the hallway, just in time to see Kelly and Barnes disappear toward the chief's office. "You two better hope the chief is in a forgiving mood," he muttered, shaking his head. Meanwhile, Chief Hill remained in the holding room a moment longer, adjusting his cuffs and collecting his composure. This was no longer just a personal insult. It was a wake-up call that demanded a much bigger response. As Chief Hill entered his office, the atmosphere shifted from tense silence to a chilling quiet that settled into every corner like fog. The blinds were already half drawn, casting faint lines of sunlight across the desk where a file marked Personnel Incident Reports lay unopened. Behind him, Officers Kelly and Barnes stood stiffly, their backs straight and faces tight with anxiety, like cadets facing expulsion. Hill didn't sit immediately. Instead, he walked slowly to the window, folding his arms behind his back, staring at the city beyond the glass. "You know," Hill began, his voice composed but weighted with authority, "I worked my way up from patrol, just like you two. I was once the guy riding in the passenger seat, scanning sidewalks, trying to prove I belonged. But I never imagined that one day I'd have to prove I belonged in my own department, to my own men." Neither Kelly nor Barnes dared to move, the seconds stretching painfully long between each word. Hill turned and finally took a seat behind the desk, steepling his fingers together. "Let me be clear, this is not about me being embarrassed. I've dealt with worse than being handcuffed in my life. This is about protocol, perception, and prejudice, all of which you failed to manage. You acted based on appearance, not behavior, and that is not only a violation of ethics, it's a betrayal of everything this department stands for." Kelly shifted uneasily, sweat beading on his brow, but said nothing. Barnes finally spoke. "Sir, I understand. We were out of line, and we take full responsibility." Hill nodded slightly, acknowledging the effort but not appeased by the apology. "You treated me no differently than you would have treated any black man in a hoodie," Hill continued. "And that's exactly the problem. Our community is already losing faith in us. Incidents like this make it worse. What happens when you treat someone unfairly who doesn't have a badge? Who doesn't have a platform to speak from? What happens to the kid walking to school? Or to the father just trying to make it to work? Do they get a chance to explain, or do they end up cuffed for existing?" Kelly opened his mouth, then shut it again, realizing there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound hollow. "I want you both to reflect on your actions, not just today, but throughout your careers," Hill said. "Because if this behavior has shown itself once, it likely lives in other parts of how you patrol, how you approach, and how you think. We wear these badges to protect and serve, not to control or intimidate. And when we lose sight of that, we become part of the very problem we claim to be fighting." Barnes nodded solemnly, the guilt now fully sinking into his face. "You're both being placed on immediate administrative leave pending review," Hill announced. "There will be mandatory bias training, psychological evaluations, and if needed, disciplinary hearings. Your guns and badges now," he added, gesturing to the desk. The two officers hesitated only a moment before removing their gear and placing it down slowly, the metallic clink sounding louder than anything else in the room. Hill stared at the items for a moment before sliding the file forward and making a note inside it. "Dismissed," he said without looking up. Kelly and Barnes turned to leave, the weight of their actions dragging behind them like invisible chains. Outside the chief's office, the hallway buzzed faintly with whispered rumors, sidelong glances, and a sense that something big had just happened. Sergeant Lopez stood near the end of the hall and gave them both a look that was more pity than judgment. "Told you to watch yourselves," he muttered as they passed. Back inside, Hill remained seated, eyes focused on the framed photo of his graduating academy class, a reminder of how far he'd come and how far the department still had to go. The badge on his chest felt heavier than usual, not from guilt, but from the burden of leading with integrity in a world that often lacked it. And in that moment, Hill made a quiet vow to turn this mistake into a movement for change. The following morning, Chief Hill held an emergency meeting with the department's senior officers, filling the precinct's conference room with a thick mix of curiosity and apprehension. Most of them had already heard rumors of the previous day's events, but the full truth was still cloaked in whispers and speculation. Hill stood at the head of the long table, his face composed yet firm, holding a stack of printed papers that looked like official memos. "What happened yesterday wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror," he began, placing the stack down as his voice echoed through the silent room. "A mirror showing us the cracks in our judgment, the flaws in our assumptions, and the danger of unchecked bias." Heads turned subtly, eyes darting from one officer to another, unsure whether to nod or stay perfectly still. "Two of our own arrested me without provocation, without questioning, and without verifying who I was, based entirely on how I looked and where I walked. They've been suspended pending review. But that isn't the only step we need to take," Hill continued, scanning the faces in front of him. "We are starting a department-wide mandatory bias and community trust training, effective immediately." A few officers shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable, but none dared speak out. "We are also launching a community oversight committee, comprised of citizens, not just officers, to review police conduct and give feedback that holds weight. This committee will meet monthly, and every division captain will be required to attend and listen, not defend." A quiet murmur ran down one side of the table, but it dissipated under Hill's unwavering gaze. "If any of you have a problem with this transparency, now is the time to speak," Hill said, pausing. Silence. "Good. Then let's move forward like officers who serve, not rule," he added. Captain Ramirez, who'd served in the department nearly 20 years, raised a hand slowly. "Chief, with all due respect, do we risk undermining our authority by letting the public judge us directly?" Hill nodded thoughtfully before responding. "Captain, our authority isn't weakened by accountability. It's strengthened by it. When people trust us, we don't need to shout commands. They listen because they believe in our cause. I'd rather be questioned by the public than feared by them." A few officers nodded slowly, absorbing the truth in his words. "We patrol neighborhoods where people already look at us with doubt. It's time we give them reason to look again, with trust. Change doesn't happen by wishful thinking. It happens by uncomfortable action." He handed a printed packet to the nearest officer. "This is the new department policy, approved by the mayor this morning. You'll distribute it to your teams today." The officer took it silently and passed it along. "Every single officer will complete a community service day within the next 30 days. That's not a punishment. That's a bridge," Hill said. "We'll volunteer at shelters, youth centers, food drives, any place where people see us for who we are beyond the badge." Lieutenant McCoy leaned forward slightly. "What happens to those who refuse, Chief?" Hill didn't blink. "They won't be wearing this uniform much longer." The bluntness of that sentence hung heavy in the air, leaving no room for confusion. "This uniform is earned every single day, not just by showing up, but by showing up right." He looked around the room, meeting each officer's eyes one by one. "If we don't evolve, we collapse. I refuse to let this department fall on my watch." Someone at the end of the table whispered, "He's right," and the phrase rippled silently across the group like an unspoken agreement. "Dismissed," Hill said, stepping back from the table as chairs scraped softly and officers stood. No one clapped, no one cheered, but no one looked away either. As they filed out of the room, a new energy stirred, not quite unity yet, but the spark of something deeper. For the first time in years, the Eastwood Police Department was being rebuilt from the inside out, with truth leading the way. That same afternoon, Chief Hill walked out of headquarters and headed toward a small local park just a few blocks away, a place where teenagers often gathered after school and tension between youth and officers ran high. Dressed in a plain shirt without his badge or uniform, he blended easily with the crowd, receiving only passing glances from the people seated at benches or huddled near the basketball court. He stopped by a group of boys gathered near the edge of the court, their laughter carrying in the wind, sneakers squeaking against concrete as they passed the ball back and forth. "Mind if I sit?" Hill asked a teenage boy watching the game alone on a low brick wall, earbuds dangling from his ears. The boy looked up, squinted, and shrugged, sliding over just enough to make room. For several minutes, neither said a word. They just watched the game in companionable silence. Then Hill broke it gently. "You come here often after school?" The boy nodded. "Almost every day. Beats being home sometimes." Hill nodded in return, understanding far more than he let on. "I used to hang around spots like this too," he said, voice soft but honest. "But I stopped coming when I realized police started watching me more than they watched the game." The boy chuckled dryly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." Hill smiled faintly. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied. "Yours?" "David," Hill answered without offering his title. "You with a city or something?" Marcus asked, noticing the calm but commanding presence. "Something like that," Hill said, not ready to change the tone just yet. A pause passed between them before Marcus leaned forward slightly. "You ever been stopped for nothing?" "More times than I can count," Hill replied. Marcus laughed, a little bitterly. "Then you know how it feels." "I do," Hill said. "It's part of why I do what I do now." "What's that?" Marcus asked. Hill took a breath. "Try to fix it." Marcus didn't laugh or scoff. He just looked out at the game again, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes feels like no one's even trying," he muttered. "That's fair," Hill said. "A lot of people talk about change. Not many show up to make it happen. You here to talk or to change something?" Marcus asked, his voice sharper now. Hill turned to him fully, his eyes steady. "I'm here because 2 officers treated me the way you're treated every day, and I outrank them." Marcus blinked. "Wait, you're not just city staff, are you?" Hill smiled faintly. "I'm the chief of police." Marcus stared for a second, his mouth slightly open. "No way." Hill nodded slowly. "Yep. They cuffed me, shoved me in the back seat, and didn't believe who I was because of how I looked." "That's wild," Marcus whispered. "And now what?" "Now," Hill said, "we rebuild this department. And I'm starting by listening." Marcus gave a long, cautious look before asking, "You really think you can fix it?" "Not alone," Hill replied, "but maybe with you. And everyone else who's tired of being looked at like a problem." Marcus didn't say yes or no, but he gave a slow nod, the kind that said maybe for the first time in a long time someone meant it. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the court, Hill stood and offered Marcus a firm handshake. "You ever want to talk or help change things, come find me. My door stays open." And with that, he walked back toward headquarters, not as a man in charge, but as one finally connected to the people he swore to protect. Later that week, the first community oversight meeting took place in a converted recreation hall, where folding chairs were arranged in a wide circle to encourage open dialogue rather than stiff confrontation. Chief Hill arrived early, dressed in simple business attire, and personally helped volunteers arrange the last few chairs and set up a table with coffee and bottled water. Slowly, residents began trickling in, some out of curiosity, others driven by long-held frustrations they hadn't voiced until now. A grandmother named Miss Lila was the first to speak, her cane resting by her side as she described how her grandson had been stopped walking home 3 times in 1 month. They didn't care he had a school ID around his neck. They saw a hoodie and skin and figured that was enough, she said, her voice calm but piercing. The room stayed quiet as she finished, many nodding in shared understanding, while a few officers seated in the back shifted uncomfortably. Next came Mr. Devante, a local barber who'd been in Eastwood for 20 years, who recounted being pulled over twice within a mile of his own shop. "They didn't care that I owned a business. They looked at my car and decided I didn't belong in it," he said. Several young people followed, sharing stories that mirrored one another, being followed in stores, detained at bus stops, or told to empty their backpacks without reason. Chief Hill listened to each person, never interrupting, taking notes as though every word was a brick in the foundation of something greater. Finally, when the stories paused, Hill stood and cleared his throat. "I hear you," he said plainly, "and I believe you." The room grew even quieter, unsure what would come next. "Some officers in this department have failed you. And for that, I am deeply sorry," Hill continued. "But apologizing isn't the goal here. Rebuilding trust is." He looked around the room, locking eyes with everyone who'd shared, and even those who hadn't. "We are reviewing every stop, every search, and every complaint made in the last year. And we will act on what we find. We are rewriting our patrol guidelines to remove ambiguity and remove excuses. And most importantly, I want this room, this circle, to remain open." Monthly, a hand rose timidly in the back. It belonged to a teenage girl named Asha. "What if people are too scared to come?" she asked. "Then we go to them," Hill answered without hesitation. "In their schools, their churches, their corners, we show up before they have to shout. This can't be one room for one night. It has to be all of us, all the time." Officer Ramirez, seated near the edge, raised his hand. "Chief, will we be part of these meetings too?" "Absolutely," Hill replied. "This is for everyone, officer and civilian alike. We can't bridge a gap by staying on opposite sides." An older woman clapped slowly, then others joined, not as a standing ovation, but as a show of tentative support. After the meeting, several attendees lingered, chatting more freely than before, trading phone numbers, and signing up for volunteer patrols. A boy who had once feared police presence now signed up to be part of the department's youth advisory panel. Hill watched from a corner, silently proud, knowing this wasn't a fix, but it was a shift. One conversation at a time, one face at a time, the perception was starting to soften. Change, he knew, wasn't loud or fast. It was patient, honest, and uncomfortable. That night, Hill stayed behind to stack chairs and clean up the room, insisting on doing it himself even when others offered to help. "You don't need to do all this, Chief," one volunteer said. "I do," Hill replied with a tired smile. "If we ask the people to stand with us, we have to kneel beside them first." The lights dimmed slowly as the last trash bag was tied up, and the echo of new beginnings lingered in the empty hall. Across town, Kelly and Barnes sat silently at home, replaying the moment Hill had looked them in the eyes and demanded better. They weren't sure what the future held, but for the first time, they questioned the past they had been a part of. Hill didn't know what tomorrow's meeting would bring, but he knew today had been something rigid, ever so slightly, toward justice. And sometimes that was enough to keep moving forward, one deliberate step at a time. As the days rolled on, stories of the arrest spread far beyond the walls of the Eastwood Police Department, reaching city council members, state representatives, and even local news outlets. Headlines read, "Police Chief Wrongfully Arrested by His Own Officers," and photos of Chief Hill, calm and composed in interviews, began circulating widely. Some praised his grace under pressure, while others questioned how deep the rot must run if even the chief wasn't safe in his own city. Hill appeared on local radio stations and talk shows, not to shame the officers, but to speak openly about systemic reform and personal responsibility. "This isn't about me," he said during one interview. "It's about the thousands who go through worse and never get to tell their story on a microphone." In City Hall meetings, council members debated new funding for community police initiatives. And for once, the conversation wasn't just political, it was urgent. One councilwoman stood up mid-meeting and said, "If the chief of police can be racially profiled, then no one is immune. That's terrifying and unacceptable." In response to mounting pressure, the mayor publicly backed Hill's reform measures and announced a joint initiative to expand community review panels citywide. Meanwhile, within the department, shifts began to feel different, not just in policy, but in energy. Officers who had never questioned protocol before started second-guessing how they approach people on patrol. Some grumbled, calling it overcorrection, while others welcomed it as long-overdue reckoning. A young rookie named Officer Tran began keeping a pocket notebook where he jotted down interactions that felt questionable, vowing to reflect and improve. A veteran officer, once indifferent, began spending his breaks chatting with kids at the local skate park instead of sitting in his cruiser. In roll calls, discussions about implicit bias were no longer eye-roll moments. They were becoming the norm. Chief Hill began hosting bi-weekly forums where officers could speak honestly, without fear of discipline, about their blind spots and failures. "Growth comes from discomfort," he told them. If we're not uncomfortable, we're not changing. Some officers sat in silence. Others spoke for the first time about the stereotypes they'd internalized and how it shaped their decisions. One officer admitted, "I didn't even realize I crossed the street every time I saw a group of black teens until someone pointed it out." No one laughed or mocked him. They nodded, recognizing that accountability starts with awareness. These moments weren't loud or flashy, but they marked real evolution in a department long overdue for reflection. Kelly and Barnes, still on administrative leave, were enrolled in intensive bias training and required to write daily reflection journals submitted to a department counselor. Each day, they sat across from community members during exercises, forced to listen instead of speak. At first, the discomfort was unbearable, but slowly, cracks in their pride gave way to revelations neither of them expected. Barnes found himself revisiting his own upbringing, questioning the language and beliefs passed down without scrutiny. Kelly, who once prided himself on being colorblind, realized how that very mindset had blinded him to harm. One session, a mother named Tasha told them, "I don't need perfect cops. I need human ones who see my son as a child, not a threat." The words haunted Kelly, ringing louder than any disciplinary warning could. Hill checked in periodically, not to lecture, but to ask one question: "Are you growing or just going through it?" Both men began to answer honestly, no longer hiding behind apologies that meant nothing. Meanwhile, at Marcus's school, Hill launched a student-led initiative called Blue and You, where teens paired with officers to tackle projects like mural painting, mentorships, and youth police storytelling events. Marcus joined, initially skeptical, but soon emerged as a voice of balance, both challenging and guiding the officers who participated. "Don't show up here just to fix your image," he told one cop. "Show up because you care." Hill watched proudly as Marcus led group sessions, asking questions no adult had dared to raise in the precinct. "What makes you scared of us?" Marcus asked once. "Is it really us or what you've been told about us?" The officer answered, "Honestly, I don't know. But I want to figure it out." Hill believed then, more than ever, that change wouldn't come from a podium. It would come from spaces like this, where stories shattered assumptions. News outlets stopped calling eventually, but Hill didn't mind. Real work happened when cameras left and people remained. He stood one day by the recreation center's mural in progress, a collage of community faces, officers included, and knew it wasn't a fix, but a foundation. "We're not healed," he said aloud to no one in particular, "but maybe we're starting to breathe again." And that breath, born of pain but carried on purpose, was finally strong enough to push change forward. Weeks passed, and what began as a scandal quietly transformed into one of the most significant turning points in Eastwood's modern history. Chief Hill didn't declare victory, didn't hold press conferences, and didn't chase headlines. He just kept showing up, one meeting, one patrol, one person at a time. The Oversight Committee began releasing monthly reports, and though the early findings were painful, they were honest, raw, and necessary. Some officers resigned, unable or unwilling to adjust to the department's evolving culture, while others stepped forward to help shape what came next. Kelly and Barnes, after completing their full review period, returned not as heroes nor villains, but as men in the middle of a long, uncomfortable journey toward redemption. Their return wasn't met with applause, but it wasn't met with scorn either. It was quiet, cautious, and exactly what they needed. Chief Hill didn't welcome them back with speeches. Instead, he handed them new assignments, community liaison roles that require them to listen more than they spoke. "You don't rebuild trust with paperwork," he told them. "You rebuild it with presence." Barnes began mentoring a group of high school boys, most of whom were skeptical until they saw him show up week after week without a badge or ego. Kelly volunteered at a food bank every Thursday, quietly listening to the stories of people he once would have dismissed with a glance. Both men faced awkward conversations, piercing questions, and moments that made them rethink who they'd been before that fateful morning. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both understood now that policing wasn't about power, it was about people. The department, once guarded and rigid, had become a place of dialogue, discomfort, and deep change. Cadet training now included emotional intelligence workshops, racial history education, and a 3-day community immersion before receiving a patrol badge. Officers were expected to walk, not drive, through neighborhoods every month, attending school plays, helping with trash cleanups, or just having coffee on a front porch. These weren't press moments or PR stunts. They were steps toward rebuilding something that had been broken long before Hill ever wore the title of chief. He knew the work was far from done, And that real progress wasn't measured in applause, but in less fear on the streets and fewer apologies behind desks. The annual city review showed a sharp drop in misconduct complaints, but Hill didn't frame it as success. He called it a better beginning. At home, Hill kept a framed copy of the report on his bookshelf, right next to his academy graduation photo, and a drawing Marcus had gifted him titled Trust. The drawing showed two hands, one in a police sleeve, the other in a hoodie, meeting in the middle, holding not a baton, but a book. Hill stared at it often, using it as a compass when decisions got hard or when backlash came from those who missed the old days. He never responded to hate mail and rarely corrected misinformation. He let the work speak for itself. One evening, he returned to the park bench where he'd first met Marcus, this time finding the boy already waiting, now joined by two younger kids from the neighborhood. "They don't trust cops," Marcus said as Hill sat beside him. "But they trust me, so they're watching how you move." "Then I'll move right," Hill replied. They sat in silence as the younger kids chased a soccer ball between the benches, laughter echoing like a promise carried on the wind. "Think this will last?" Marcus asked eventually. Hill took a moment before answering. "Only if people like you keep holding us accountable. And if people like you keep listening," Marcus added. "Deal," Hill said, offering a fist bump that Marcus returned without hesitation. The streetlights flickered on as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting a soft glow over the changing city. In that moment, there were no sirens, no speeches, no outrage, just a quiet understanding shared by two people trying to do better. Hill looked out at the field, then up at the sky, and smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because people were finally facing the truth together. He knew that history wouldn't remember every meeting, every training, or every hard conversation, but it might remember the shift where silence broke, where power bent toward purpose, and where a mistake turned into a movement. In the precinct's main hallway, someone had posted a new quote on a wall: "Leadership is not being in charge. Leadership is taking care of those in your charge." Hill didn't know who put it there, but he read it every morning before unlocking his door. It reminded him of the cuffs he'd worn that morning, cold, unjust, and unforgettable, and how they'd sparked a fire no punishment could ever match. That fire still burned, not as anger now, but as action, quiet, deliberate, and just beginning. And in a city where change once felt impossible, one man's arrest had lit the match that finally helped them see the way forward.